The SDK is collecting a lot of data. So we look at, token usage, but we also look at actual prompts and completions. So we take all of this information, we ingest it in the platform. And then on top of it, we built a set of tools and a set of metrics that gives you a good sense of whether your model is hallucinating, whether it's like repeating itself, sending out garbage texts out. We kind of take this whole, question of what's a good quality output from an LLM model and then just run in real time on your production system.
Welcome to the Highlight Podcast. I am Jay, the CEO of Highlight.
Chris, head of our DevRel efforts here at Highlight.
And last but not least, we have Nir, an ex-Google engineer, and now the CEO of Traceloop, a YC-backed LLM observability company. Nir and I met through the YC ecosystem. They actually went through the same batch as us. And so we got really close through the YC program. And Nir, excited to have you. You want to give us a quick intro and tell us a little bit about what you do at Traceloop?
Yeah, so it's great to be here. So I'm the CEO of Traceloop. We're a platform for LLM observability. We're building tools that help companies understand how their LLM is performing in terms of quality, but also latency and other issues that may arise. And we're using OpenLLMetry behind the scenes. So we have an SDK. It's open source. It's called OpenLLMetry, and it's pretty cool.
Nice, awesome. I feel like recently you became particularly popular because of that. The drama around, and we can leave this out if you don't want to talk about this publicly, but the drama around another company copying your public repo and then not giving you attribution and stuff like that. Do you want to talk about that?
So I think the problem is that, and there's also someone wrote a piece about it, like a news piece about the fact, like around this whole open source ecosystem, because there were lots of projects in recent 1 or 2 years that went back from Apache 2 and other like permissive licenses towards these like business closed licenses.
Yeah.
So you have Elastic and you have what are the others? I forgot. I have like a
Redis.
Yeah, Redis did that.
Redis recently. What else?
HashiCorp.
HashiCorp, yeah. HashiCorp
got in all kinds of trouble.
Yeah, and they got a lot of backlash on that. So there's a lot of conversation around it. Then, for our open source, we basically, so we did, we took, I know we can talk about it later, but we took the infrastructure of OpenTelemetry and extended it to support OpenAI, Anthropic, like LLM foundation models, and vector databases and frameworks like LangChain and Llama Index. And we released it, I think it was last October. And I think it started catching on, in the past few months. We started seeing more and more contributions. We see more, people ask us questions on Slack. So we know people are using it, and it with time it became, pretty extensive. Right now we support like 15 different foundation models, vector databases, and frameworks. So it's it's pretty big. And then one day and of course we're Apache too, because I really believe in open source and everything. And then one day I discovered this other company basically taking the open source, copying it and rebranding it as if it was, as if it's theirs, using a really, really similar name. So it's really hard to, I was looking for OpenLLMetry, but this looks similar to, maybe I was wrong with the name. It's kind of deceptive, I would say. And just the same code base, the same everything. They never asked us, never talked to us. And you may say, because we're Apache 2, they can do it. They don't need to, they can do whatever they want with the code. So it got me thinking. I don't think, I know we will never change our license, because I'm like a strong believer in open source, and I've contributed to open source projects at least for the last 10 years. But
Yeah.
it makes me think, like, I can understand. I get it now. I get why Redis, why Elastic, why HashiCorp, why all of these, big companies are afraid of other companies taking their code and just taking their business off. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I feel like specifically for Elastic, it was tough for them, right? Because I feel like the amount of revenue that AWS makes from that OpenSearch project is very significant. I mean, maybe like recent years it hasn't been amazing, but like I feel, it kind of sucks that you work on this project and your business model is hosting of that project, and then like some behemoth can come by and just like take it and work off of it. So
Yeah. And I think even Elastic's license is pretty permissive, but the fact, like, they had so much bad publicity around the license that when people think about Elastic, they're like, no, they're not open source. I probably can't deploy it myself, because there probably will be some restrictions around it. So yeah, I think this whole licensing issues is a big issue.
Kind of crazy. Yeah. But anyway, so Nir, you have basically a set of SDKs that like hook into things like Anthropic and OpenAI and give people observability there. Tell us a little bit about like the platform that you've built behind it. You have like a platform behind it that lets people visualize that. Like, I'm curious, maybe from your perspective, give us let's start with just an overview of what it does.
So the SDK is collecting a lot of data points from your application. So we look at, token usage, but we also look at actual prompts and completions. And if you're building like a RAG pipeline, we have the data around the scores that you've gotten back from the vector database and the distances of the vectors. So we take all of this information, we ingest it in the platform. And then on top of it, we built a set of tools and a set of metrics that gives you a good sense of whether your model in production, whether your model is hallucinating, whether it's like just repeating itself, sending out garbage texts out, or not, if you expect it to reply in a certain structure, like misses out on the structure and it replies in completely different formats. So we kind of take this whole, question of what's a good quality output from an LLM model, and how can you validate it or evaluate it, and try to break it down into a set of metrics you can set in the platform, then just run in real time on your production system.
Got it. And what do you, so I guess that tool set is sort of new to us, right? Like I think we actually have a few customers that use Highlight for this sort of use case via, whether it be OpenLLMetry or even just like using regular traces to like represent some of those events. How do you, like, when an engineer works on like a generative AI application, are they often running like evaluation in production after their code executes, like on the same like set of like instances? Like, how does that work? And then how does that also work with Traceloop?
So I think everyone wants to, everyone wants to know what's happening in production, and everyone wants to know when their model hallucinates. I don't know how, I'm guessing that you also got the chance to be, on the other side, to be a customer using some product that is wrapped around an LLM, and it happens often. You get, responses that don't make sense. You have tons of bugs. It's like still work in progress to get these types of applications to work perfectly. So yeah. I think a lot of companies would want to be able to constantly monitor their outputs and being able to tell when things go wrong. It's kind of, Sentry, but for LLMs, if you think about it.
Yeah, understood.
And I think the problem is that it's hard. It's hard to tell it's how to evaluate an output in production, because you need to build a metric that has low latency, and you can run pretty cheaply, because you're gonna have like millions of users using your product in production. You can, for example, call another LLM, ask it if the response is okay or not, which is a pretty common pattern when you do like offline evaluation during development. It's called using like LLM as a judge evaluation technique, and there's a lot of frameworks that will build around it, like Ragas and others.
Yep. Understood. So you're saying, got it. So you're saying ideally people do it in production, but it's not really sustainable because it's just expensive to be able to. It's like almost the same amount of effort as actually generating the response in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. You can't call another. You can't pay as much as you're paying for OpenAI for just generating the response to just evaluate that it's okay. It doesn't make sense.
Got it. Understood. And then what is the solution? Is it like sampling? And then what's the tool set look like for if I'm a YC company with 3 people on my team? Like what do I use to actually run those evaluations? Are there cheaper models I can use? Are there platforms that I can use? What does that look like?
So there are a lot of, I think, like this whole like language understanding domain with machine learning is not new, and there's been a lot of research around it for, I think, at least the past 15 years.
Okay.
And there are a lot of metrics that were developed during this period, and sometimes it's really easy to miss them out. And most of them, because they were built in the like a pre-LLM era, they're usually pretty cheap to run. So these are like, most of them can be a really good basic set that you can use in production to evaluate the quality of your outputs. So, for example, there's one metric that I like, which is called the BERT score, which is based on BERT, which is like the pre-GPT model that was developed by Google. And it's meant to be used with RAG pipelines. And the idea is that with RAG pipeline, the user asks a question and you go to a vector database and you get a set of documents that should be really close to the question that the user asked in the vector space. And then you take all this is called the context. You take this with the question to an LLM and then ask the LLM, okay, answer the user's question based on this context. And then the LLM answers. And so one easy way to tell if the LLM is probably going to hallucinate is if there's no answer to the user's question in the context, right? Let's say you built a vector database around the documentation of highlight, and then you build the chatbot that uses this data to answer questions about highlight. And then I'm asking this bot, hey, what's for dinner tonight? Like, what's the most famous dish made in Italy? Probably they're not going to find any answer in the highlight documentation there. So it's going to hallucinate. Hopefully they're going to answer something which might sound correct, but I can ask, lots of crazy sounding questions that there won't be an answer anywhere to them. So the LLM is going to hallucinate probably. So this is like a good way of measuring whether the model is going to hallucinate, just looking at the distances between the query and the context that you've got. If the context is really far away from the query, then probably it's completely irrelevant to the question that the user asked.
Wait. So okay. I'm just thinking this through. So you're saying that let's use that example that you have, right? Where I have a set of documents that's within the highlight documentation, and I have a question that I want to ask. The point of this BERT score is to determine what? What's the goal of it? That's to determine.
I haven't gotten to the BERT score yet, but I'm talking.
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm on the same page then. Okay, keep going.
So we have. I think like just looking at vector distances can make a lot of sense in a lot of use cases.
Okay.
Just figuring that out. So sure. the other thing you can do in terms of distances is looking at the answer. Okay, there's a context. I send it to the LLM with the question and got an answer. I can take that answer and find the reasoning. Like I can look for like the sentences from the context that were probably used to answer the question by the LLM, because they should be here. If you can't find a sentence in the context that is closely related to the answer that the LLM sent you back, then probably the LLM made it up or just responded with like something completely unrelated. So BERT score can help you figure out how close is the answer to one of the sentences in the context you've got. So if you get a low score, this probably means that you don't have any grounding of the answer within the context.
And the BERT score is more complex than a simple vector comparison.
It's at the end of the day, it's sophisticated vector comparison, yeah.
Okay,
which is why it's really cheap to run.
Understood. Got it. That's very interesting. Yeah, I never thought of someone asking like, "What's for dinner?" I guess against like our highlight data, and honestly, in that case, I imagine there are cases where you want to tell the system you've built not to answer the question, and be like, "That's a shitty question. Don't answer it," or whatever. Yeah, and
but
I feel like you could use the BERT score for that, right? Like you could say, hey, if the answer you generate from what a question is asked on, the BERT score is above some or below some, however it works, right? Just don't answer it. It's not worth your time or something.
So I think this was like, I can give you a more realistic example, which we actually saw of like someone using our documentation. So I saw the other day, like someone asked me about it, and they tried searching our documentation. Like there's like a bot there, I think, like was built by Mintlify or something. So there's a bot there that you can ask it questions. And someone asked, "Can I host Traceloop on premise?" And we don't have any mention of on premise in our documentation. But the answer is that you can host Traceloop on premise, but we don't. Now we say it, but we haven't said it before in our documentation. So the bot answered, "No, you cannot use Traceloop on-prem."
Okay.
So this is like, this is a problem, right? This is like a real problem. This was a question. It's a relevant question. The only problem is that it's a question where there's no answer in the context. So I would expect the bot to answer like, "I don't know, maybe you should contact, the CEO or something." But instead he was like, "No, you can't do it."
Well, I guess, but at the same time, if the LLM is trained, is like big enough, right? If it's large enough, then you would think that it would understand that an open source monitoring thing is self-hostable, right? Even given the context of only the documents in the database, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's not crazy to think that it would say that it is self-hostable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. To me, that makes me think that the LLM they're using, the Mintlify or whatever tool, is like not large. It's not knowledgeable enough, But maybe not. Maybe also the documents you're feeding through are not. There's not enough of them, and it doesn't have enough documents on the fact that it's open source or something like that. But at that point, it becomes harder to measure, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, it's harder to see why something would have gone wrong. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, cool. So I guess, Nir, going back to Traceloop stuff, right? Related to maybe this thing. You mentioned like things like scores and running RAGAS after evaluating the output of models and things like that. How does that work with Traceloop and with OpenLLMetry? Do you send those events like via like span attributes? Do you use OpenTelemetry metrics? Like what does the pipeline look for with respect to like actually measuring these things? So
we do support OpenTelemetry metrics and OpenTelemetry traces on the SDK, but we don't calculate most of the metrics on the SDK just because we want to decrease the footprint on your application. If we were starting to calculate BERT scores or whatever on the SDK, then you would get it as part of the OpenTelemetry metrics, but it will be really costly for your application to like run it as part of its own execution. So we send most of the raw data to our pipeline, and then we do most of the calculations on the Traceloop platform end.
Okay, got it. So you support the metrics and the trace attributes and all that fun stuff, but you also support running evaluations on your end. Yeah? Is that what you're saying?
We run the evaluations. Yeah, we run the evaluations on the platform end as like a derivative of the raw data that we got from the SDK.
Oh, okay. How does that work? So is it like, how would I tell you as a customer of Traceloop that I want to run RAGAS for some number of these outputs? Is that an option?
So we usually don't run things like RAGAS because you can't really use them at scale in production. Okay. What we do is like we use our own like set of metrics instead. Because potentially the problem is like running RAGAS is that, as we said before, like you would be calling an LLM for every LLM call you're making. So it's going to be pretty expensive. So you configure in the platform, once you connect the SDK to the platform, you can configure it. You can configure which metrics you want to use for your applications.
Got it. And you use basically a set of simpler, like more, I guess, more scalable methods to run these, run these metrics. Okay. And then in terms of those evaluations, what are the things you offer?
So it is a huge range. Currently, we have around 30 or 40 metrics that we support.
Okay.
They range from structural ones. So sometimes people just want to be able to, let's say you have an LLM outputting a JSON. You want to make sure that you get a JSON and it contains certain fields. There's a schema you want it to comply with. So we can check that. Or you generate code. You want to just make sure that you generate valid code. So we support that. And then we have a lot of things around language, figuring out, if there's repetitiveness, if there's things that doesn't make sense, in terms like the text doesn't make sense, because this can sometimes happen. And we have things around semantics, what just we mentioned, around like relevancy and how relevant is the answer to the question, how relevant is the answer to the context, and things like that. And we also have some metrics around security. So figuring out if the users try to jailbreak, or there's like PII leaks from the model, and other things that we see that people need.
Interesting. It's almost like security at that point, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Exactly. Okay. That's very cool. How have the evaluations that you supported changed since OpenAI and all these companies have gotten better and better? Like, for example, I was playing with some LLM stuff a couple of weeks back, and I think they have now a concept of JSON responses. Like they almost guarantee that you'll get an output of JSON, and you can tell it to have certain fields. So yeah, how has that changed? Like, I imagine that 30 isn't going down to like 10, right? But like, I imagine some of the things that you've built for are starting to kind of become less relevant because the models are getting better. How has that happened? Or will that happen? And what do you think about the future?
So it's a good question, because at the end of the day, even if you go to OpenAI documentation, they won't tell you that they can guarantee you'd always get a JSON. They also tell you like, make sure that you have like guardrails, because this can go wrong.
Got it.
It's never 100%.
Okay.
And I was thinking the same thing. I was doing demos, and I was always going to like the more complex metrics that we have. So I have like this, you go to the platform and I show the metrics that we have, and I always go scroll down to like the more complex one. And I can't tell you how many times, people like say, no, stop. And they look at like the JSON validation, like, yeah, I want this. And I'm thinking like, yeah, this is pretty simple, right? It's not that complex. Do you need it? Yes. Like, yeah, we have a lot of issues with that. We'd love to know when this fails. And so sometimes even the simple metrics, even today, they're still needed, and you still want to be able to use them to validate the outputs.
Got it. Yeah. And perhaps, it kind of makes sense why OpenAI wouldn't like specialize in JSON specifically, because who knows if there's some other format that people want to use long term, or there's something proprietary to a company. It makes sense that you would want to build your own evals for that kind of thing. That's very interesting. Cool. I guess, Nir, what other interesting stories do you have for us in terms of customers that you use Traceloop for specific use cases and things? Like any fun things to share on that end?
So there's an interesting attribute that we've discovered we talked about OpenAI, so we can talk about that a bit more. So everyone knows that, just this week, OpenAI released the GPT-4o. And okay, this is a new model. It might have, it might affect the way my application is performing. There might be some performance degradation, or the performance will become better. I don't know. I know that I need to test it because something has changed. But what most people don't know is that together with the response, OpenAI sends something which is called the system fingerprint. Because at the end of the day, today, the OpenAI model is not just the neural network that is getting updates from every once in a while. There's a whole big unknown system happening, before and after that neural network that processes the output. So, for example, even the JSON, I'm guessing that the JSON, the promise that you'll get a JSON is not something that is hard programmed into the neural network, because I don't know of any way of forcing a neural network to always output a JSON. So I'm guessing there's some deterministic code that is working before or after, making sure that you'd get the output that you'd expect. And this is something that they changed often. They don't tell you about it. The only way for you to know that something has changed is the system fingerprint. So you may wake up one day with the same application, and you suddenly see, you're getting responses which are worse than yesterday. Something changed, but you haven't touched the model, you haven't touched your application, but something's changed. And most of the times, the answer is the system fingerprint. OpenAI deployed a change on their end, and the only way for you to know that is just by looking at the system fingerprint version.
But you can't. You can't force a fingerprint to be it's not like the previous version of the fingerprint still exists somewhere. It's not like an API version.
No.
Interesting. That's really interesting. And then I guess you can.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Last thing is that I guess you can build tooling around that, right? Like you can graph I don't know, eval scores by system fingerprint, and then kind of be able to see that. It's kind of. I feel like at the same time, it kind of sucks because you have no choice, right?
Yeah, you can't do anything about it, but you at least what went wrong. It's kind of like when you look at the in Datadog or other tools, you can see deployments. You can see where did you deploy change to your code, so you'll be able to see okay, this is a new fingerprint. So this might explain this change I've seen in the graph.
And Traceloop will report that system fingerprint.
Yes.
Yeah.
We wanna start tracking it. I wonder how often do they change it, and I wanna just like keep track of it for a month, and then like maybe we can write a blog post about it. Like how often?
Oh yeah.
30 days. How many times did OpenAI change their system fingerprint?
You should do that. That. They yeah, that would go well. I feel like in like an HN post. Like I feel like the LLM Hacker News strat is very real. You know, but makes sense. That's very cool. Awesome. What else do I have? I feel like we're kind of good on time. I don't have any too much more to ask. I mean, I don't want to go too deep, honestly, just because of the time situation. But anything else, Nir, that you would want to mention on the Traceloop end? How can people use the product?
So there are two options if you want to use the product. One of them, so we can maybe talk a bit about like OpenLLMetry and how we started and where it is now. So OpenLLMetry is a set of extensions we built on top of OpenTelemetry to support large language models. And the idea is that you needed to add a couple of what is called semantic conventions so that you can report prompts, completion, token usage, and things that, like OpenTelemetry didn't have the right language that you could use to report these types of this information.
Okay.
So we had to like basically we invented our own semantic conventions, and we started implementing it across foundation models. And nowadays, what we've done is that I've collaborated with folks from Microsoft and Apple and Elasticsearch, and we're basically taking our semantic conventions, like OpenLLMetry semantic conventions, and we're slowly turning them into like official OpenTelemetry semantic conventions.
Okay.
I think, hopefully, and it takes time because there's a lot of debate around each attribute and each attribute name. But hopefully, 6 months from now, we're going to have everything as part of the official OpenTelemetry semantic conventions, which will make it easier for other observability platforms to adopt these semantic conventions. But cool. Even today, I know a lot of people, and this goes back to your question, a lot of people take the open source, install it on their application. The installation it takes 5 minutes. You run pip install, initialize the SDK, and that's it. And you also support Node.js. And then people connect it to Datadog, and people connect it to Dynatrace or New Relic. And basically, because we are OpenTelemetry compliant, is the same protocol, they are able to see prompts, completion, token usage in Datadog, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So this is one way of using it. Just you can install the SDK, connect it to your observability platform that you use today. You can connect it to Highlight, right? And it just works. I think this is like the greatest thing I like about OpenTelemetry.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What any learnings in terms of like working with those other folks at other companies in terms of the process around these new conventions? Like, does it just take a while because it's like you need to get everyone in a meeting room every month to kind of like follow up on things? And how much slower is that than just working on the startup trace loop?
It's so much slower because
I see.
we have by the way, like we're meeting every week. I'm leading these meetings.
Okay.
We're meeting every week. If you go to the OpenTelemetry website, it's open for everyone. Everyone can join.
Okay.
It's called like the Semantic Conventions Working Group. And the problem is that, there's a lot of debate around naming, around every little detail that you can think of. And these are good debates, but it takes a lot of time to get to get agreements. Yeah. And so we start with this huge PR. Okay, we want to add 20 semantic conventions, and there's a lot of debate around the first and fifth. So let's remove them, and then we have more debates around this. So let's remove them. And at the end of the day, we end up with like 2 semantic conventions that everyone kind of agreed on after 2 weeks of debates. So we only add them, and now we need to go back to the other 18 and figure out how to get agreements on them. So it takes a long time to get everyone to agree.
Makes sense. This reminds me of me and my friends have a movie night every week. This is completely unrelated, but sort of related. We have a movie night every week. And in order to be able to pick a movie for movie night, you need to have come to some number of movie nights and watched movies.
Mm-hmm.
And we distribute, well, this is kind of a meme that I've kind of built, but we distribute tokens when you watch a movie.
Okay.
And then in order to pick a movie, you have to dispel your tokens, some number of tokens. So maybe you could do that with your semantic conventions, and you have to show up to some number of meetings before you can propose a debate around a convention. Just an idea.
I think I don't have saying around how to approve semantic convention in OpenTelemetry. But the debates are good. I think we're getting to you get I have some experience with OpenTelemetry, but we're sitting in the same room with people who basically built the protocol, who basically defined everything. So they have so much more experience around what should be done and what's the problem with other things. So for example, we send the prompts and completions as normal attributes, which makes it really easy for observability platforms to just display it as part of the span. Yep. But apparently there's a limit on the size of the attribute that you can send. And this is not really documented anywhere, but some like New Relic does, like they just trim attributes that are longer than 1 kilobyte or something. So you can't really send a prompt there because the prompt could be really long, and then New Relic will trim it. So you have to find another solution. So this is the kinds of debates we are having there.
Yeah. That's very interesting. Very interesting. Cool. And then, okay, so I guess Nir, like, what I'm also curious about the direction of like Traceloop for you. So it sounds like you work a lot with these other observability vendors. In your mind, is the long-term direction that you build like like an LLM specific observability platform, just in terms of like the commercials around the business?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it. And you
I think it's not just LLM. You know, it will be. We already see today. We have like multi-models. We have images. We have sound, and I think that first is going to be a real challenge figuring out how to send images on top of OpenTelemetry, and then another challenge of how to run evaluations on images. How to tell, you know, a good image versus a bad one. It's interesting questions that we definitely want to be there as well.
Makes sense. And you think that, like, I guess that world is very small. It's like relatively small right now, but I imagine is only growing, right?
Yeah.
And maybe in today's world, people are using things like New Relic and Datadog, but as it becomes more and more specialized, they'll need like something like a sort of special tool for it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think like I'm using Datadog and Sentry. Both of them are like observability platforms, but they serve a different purpose. So
makes sense. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's cool. Nice. Well, maybe we can wrap up. Nir, give us a little bit more about where people can find you and where people can find Traceloop and OpenTelemetry respectively.
Yes. Me personally.
Yeah, why not?
So I don't know when this will be out, but we have a really interesting webinar coming up next Thursday. It's probably going to be too late, but we are doing a webinar with Pinecone around getting RAG pipelines into production. So we're going to talk in depth on some of the things we've mentioned briefly here around evaluating quality, like output quality in scale in production.
Got it.
So I'm going to have like many more webinars in the future. So I don't know, LinkedIn or Twitter, I'm there. Just look up Traceloop or Nir Gazit. I think you'll find me.
Sounds good.
And specifically for Traceloop, so traceloop.com is the main website. And from there, you can get to our open source, which is OpenLLMetry. So it's OpenLLMetry.
Got it.
But you can just go to traceloop.com and you'll find it there. And yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for the time, Nir. This was really cool. And yeah, not to mention that perhaps we do like a webinar together with Traceloop and Highlight at some point, because yeah, similar to like the New Relic stuff that we were talking about earlier, I think we could do a lot of that kind of thing in Highlight. So that would be fun to collaborate on. So
yeah, definitely.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for coming. And yeah, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for being on.
Sure. Anytime. It was great being here.